Lots of seats right up front. Lots of, this perfect place. Over here is a perfect place. Oh, come on. Hey, delightful. We are live. Yes, so woohoo is okay. I don't know who said, did you say that? That was very sweet. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Norman, Oklahoma. This is our, yeah, okay, there we go. I'm from Minnesota. We don't make verbal gestures of any type. We're very, very quiet, very at rest. No, thank you, seriously. My name is Chuck Marohn. I'm the president and founder of an organization called Strong Towns. This is our kickoff event for the Strong Towns Community Action Lab. I want to get right into it tonight because I really want to respect your time. I know there's a lot of people that are going to be watching this live too, and I don't want to belabor things. But before I get started, I just want to say a couple brief things about what we're doing here. At Strong Towns, we were I went through this story in a long way this afternoon with a group here. But we were cajoled into doing this new program called the Community Action Lab. And I'll summarize it by saying we were asked to bring everything that Strong Towns does in terms of messaging and idea generation and coaching and events to a city, to a county actually in Central Florida. And when we did this, our board prompted us or recognized that if this was going to be a successful thing to do, we needed to bring other communities into this conversation. And we put out a call for places. We said, who would be interested in having Strong Towns come and do a similar program in their community? We had, I think, 18 applicants, 18 communities who stepped up and said, we would like to do this. As soon as Norman's name was added to that list by your local leadership, I immediately said, this is a place that we need to go. I think this is my fourth time being invited to speak in Norman to one degree or another. There's a lot of friendly faces in this crowd. I've been invited to speak in Oklahoma City on 3 different occasions. There's a very active Strong Towns conversation here in this community and in this region. And for us, these programs are all about building momentum. How do we build momentum in a place? And how do we take the momentum that we're building in a place? Because we're a nonprofit organization. We're trying to change the pattern of growth and development across North America. The way we do that is by sharing ideas, sharing messages, sharing media. And so our strategy is a strategy about affecting hearts and minds, about exposing people to new thoughts and new ideas. And a big part of doing that is being able to point to success stories. We see Norman as a success story already. And a big part of what we want to do when we're here is not come in and tell you, here's all the things you're doing wrong and do this differently, but walk beside you, help broaden your conversation, help expand the ideas that are in play here, and really be able to ultimately celebrate successes. I invited 2 of my closest friends. I'm sorry, I can't remember the names of these 2 young Norman residents, but I invited them to come and I asked them not to leave, even if they were a little boisterous. Like I said, in Minnesota, we're very, very quiet and keep to ourselves in a meeting like this, except for our kids. They are very loud and make up for the rest of us. So I will feel very at home if your kids are vocal tonight. So please don't feel like you need to leave or anything. Let's get going. I want to start with this question, which is a question that people struggle with. So let me build up to it. A municipal government is a public corporation. And by the way, I have to stand behind this podium because otherwise people won't hear me. And if I use this mic, you have to literally eat it. And I'm not that interested in eating a mic. So I'm going to stand here because then I can talk in my native language with these hands and all that. A municipal government is a public corporation. We think about corporations. If I say a corporation to you, we might think of like Walmart or General Motors or what have you. We think of as international conglomerate. But a municipality is a corporation made under the same or very similar statutes. When we create a city, we are actually making an incorporated municipality as a municipal corporation. As a municipal corporation, the city has a board of directors, right? It has a city council, it has a commission. They're the board of directors, and they are elected by the stockholders of the corporation, which are the citizens of the community. We vote for our chair, we vote for our board of directors, and just like a standard corporation, that is the shareholders that do that. When we look at the reason why we create public corporations, municipal corporations, they all have a function within our government. Why do we create these entities? For cities, we create public corporations to provide self-governance and, quote, a variety of services, right? We're all on the same page here, right? I want you to have this notion of the city as a incorporated municipality when I ask you this question. Does our municipal corporation need to run a profit? Shaking our head immediately, nodding immediately. There's a differing of opinions. This is one of those questions that tends to divide people, divide audiences. There's oftentimes a strong reaction. And when I put this up here, does our municipal corporation need to run a profit? There's a certain level of disgust among some people at the very suggestion. Government is not about running a profit. We are not about, fleecing our citizens. We are about doing public good. We're about doing things for society. We shouldn't be talking about things like profit. That is something that is beyond us. I want to delve into that reaction and the answer to this question. So let me ask this. Does Walmart need to run a profit? We may have some people here who are deeply, along the socialist spectrum, or like, wait, I don't care if Walmart runs a profit. All right, fine. I don't really personally care about Walmart either. But if Walmart is going to be around, Walmart has to run a profit, right? We recognize that part of Walmart continuing to exist is that they have to run in profit. So for Walmart to stay in business, Walmart needs to have revenues that are greater than their expenses, right? That is what the definition of profit is. It's having revenues that are greater than expenses. We're all on the same page? Okay. Does an orphanage need to run a profit? Now, I realize we don't use the term orphanage as often as maybe they did in the past. I could have said child care shelter or whatever the modern term is. But we all, I think of like Charles Dickens. Like, the whole point here is when we're doing something to care for the most vulnerable in society, does an entity doing that need to run a profit? Well, for an orphanage to stay in business, regardless of how much good they are doing for society, regardless of the value that they are providing, regardless of the vulnerability of the people they are caring for, an orphanage has to have revenues that exceed expenses. Their accountant is going to look at their balance sheet and say, you must run a profit. Like, that is a prerequisite for you staying around and continuing to do good as an orphanage. All right. So does our municipal government need to run a profit? Well, if we step back and we look and we say, well, for us to stay in business, right, we have to what? We have to have revenues that are greater than expenses. Our local government actually needs to run a profit. Now, notice what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that local government's existence is to maximize their profit, right? Or to, what's the term that we like to use now? Maximize shareholder value, right? But a prerequisite for us being around is that we have to have revenues that exceed our expenses. I want to go another level into this inquiry because I want you to think about the implications of not running a profit. What happens if Walmart doesn't run a profit? What happens if Walmart has, I'm sure they can go a quarter, 2 quarters, maybe some years without running a profit. But what happens if they go successive years without a profit? What happens to Walmart at a certain point? Yeah, they go out of business. They go away. If that particular store is not running a profit or the entity itself, I like to point out, we don't have the Hudson Bay Company anymore, right? Like things change. If Walmart doesn't run a profit, Walmart will close. Now, does that mean that all of you will not be able to get toilet paper and toothpaste and Funyuns and whatever else you get at Walmart? No, we will still get those things, right? We will get them somewhere else. In a market economy, what will happen ideally is that there will be a reaction and someone else will find a supply chain to be able to provide these things. Walmart going out of business is not a prerequisite for us to exist and be here. What happens if the orphanage doesn't run a profit? Now, an orphanage might be doing the Lord's work, right? Caring for vulnerable people, doing things that we all would like to see done in society, but we recognize that if an orphanage does not run a profit, if the orphanage does not have revenues greater than expenses over the long term, sure, maybe they can do a fundraiser here or there or move things around to make ends meet. But ultimately, if they go an extended period of time without running a profit, they are going to go out of business, regardless of the need that they fill. Right? Now, hopefully, some other organization would step up and fill that need, right? Hopefully, someone else would provide that service, that needed service. But that entity running that orphanage, if they don't run a profit, they go away. What happens to our municipal government if it doesn't run a profit? Does it go away? No, it doesn't go away. What happens? It just starts providing really poor service. It performs as a really bad government, right? And when we have a really bad government, when we don't function well, people start to get hurt, right? Things start to not work. Things start to go bad. A failed government doesn't go away. We don't, if City A fails, we don't take their water tower and bring it over to City B, right? If Tulsa, let me pick on Tulsa. If Tulsa fails, we don't pick up the homes in Tulsa and move them to Oklahoma City and say, all right, now we're going to relocate you here to a place that's functioning, right? We don't do that, right? A failed government doesn't go away. It just lingers on. And I put the zombies in the background because it becomes, in a sense, like The Walking Dead, right? If we want to do good, and I think we can start this conversation with the premise that we all want to do good, right? We all want to see good done in our community. We may differ on what that looks like precisely, but I think if we think about the intentions of our neighbors and the people in this room and the people watching on the live stream, we recognize that we all want to do good. In order for us to do good in the community, our municipal corporation must run a profit. And it must run a profit today, it must run a profit tomorrow, and it must run a profit indefinitely into the future. I wrote in Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution, something that a few people have gotten upset about and even been uninspired by, boy, Chuck, this is really uninspiring. I wrote that a city's job, it can be boiled down to one thing, and that is to endure over time. That seems, for people who aspire to work for government or do public good or take on grand undertakings, that seems a little bit underwhelming, right? To endure over time. Chuck, can we aspire to more? And yes, possibly we could aspire to more, but I think it's important to recognize how difficult that actually is. This idea that not only would we be able to be in business for today as a municipal corporation, but that we would be functioning and doing good tomorrow and a year from now and a decade from now and 2 decades from now, it makes us look at things a little bit differently. Before a couple of my colleagues and I started Strong Towns, I spent a period of time working as a civil engineer, a period of time working as a land use planner. And one of the things that I did was I started to evaluate projects that I had worked on to look at them from a municipal balance sheet perspective. I'm going to say something right now, and I say this about your community, but I'm going to say this about really every city in the United States. There's nobody whose job at City Hall is to evaluate the financial efficacy of projects we do. Yes, we will look at benefit cost analysis here and there. Yes, we will look at different financial things. But shockingly, there is no role in city government to actually look at this. I served as many years as a city engineer, and our job was to come with the costs, and here's what things would cost. I served as many years as a city planner, and when I would show up to the meeting and the engineer brought the costs, I would say, well, here's the development program we'll put in around this. I worked with bond agents and city finance people, and their obsession was always, how do we get the money to do the things we're trying to do? But it was shocking to me to recognize that there really isn't a position, there really isn't a career path for being the person who sits down and actually counts the beans in terms of the development projects we're doing. I started to do this, and I'm going to show you 3 projects that I analyzed. I analyzed dozens of these. It was because there's no one at City Hall doing this. When you're the person who brings the answers to the table, you become very unpopular very quickly. But let me show you kind of the results of having this analysis done on our typical development pattern. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. I'm going to turn around here and see my, oh yeah, this will work. You see that's just a dead-end road. There's residential homes along the road. I like this one because there's no complexity to it. It's just a very simple dead-end cul-de-sac. If the homes weren't there, there would be no road. If there was no road, there'd be no homes. They rely on each other. There's no through traffic here. There'll be no extension of this, so there's no like oversizing for future use. It's just a standard cul-de-sac. When this was built, it was this city's requirements or proposal that if the property owners on this road would pay half the cost of the road, the city would pay the other half. And then the city would take over the road and maintain it over the long term, right? I looked at this and said, okay, we know how many homes are on the road. We know the amount of taxes they pay every year to the city. How long will it take the city to recoup the amount of money that they just spent to build their half of the road? The answer is 37 years. The road's not going to last 37 years, but that's what it takes the city to recoup the amount of money they spent. Of course, the city's going to have to go out and fix the road at some point. Where's the revenue for that going to come from? I don't know, not from the taxpayers in this development. This is another kind of standard suburban style development. This is the kind of stuff that we all build along the edges of our cities. Again, I like this example because it's a closed loop with a dead-end cul-de-sac. So no through traffic, no commercial traffic. This road was served just the property owners here. If the property owners here did not exist, there would be no need for a road. This was built, and a developer built the entire thing. Put in all the road infrastructure, the sewer, the water, the drainage. The developer built all the homes, sold those off. Of course, the people who bought those homes paid the cost of that infrastructure in their mortgage. They've been paying that for years. They've also been paying taxes to the city, ostensibly to maintain the road and the sewer and the water and all that stuff. The city had to go out and fix the road. The road had fallen apart. The cost was $354,000. We looked at the amount of revenue the city collects from the property owners within this development and said, how long is it going to take the city to break even on the amount they just spent to fix the road? The answer is 79 years. We then asked the question, okay, what if the city wanted to try to break even between now and the time the road fell apart? What if they wanted to raise enough money between then to actually go out and maintain the road the next time around? The answer was an immediate increase of 46% in taxes, with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years. That was just for the roadway. The sewer, the water, the drainage system are all vastly more expensive. Now, thank you, I appreciate that. Sometimes we get into this trap where we think, all right, we know we lose money on residential property, we'll make it up on commercial. Within the development professions, sometimes when we get in this conversation, that is what comes back to me. It's like, okay, Chuck, you don't have to show us any more residential developments. We know we're losing money there. We got plenty of commercial, we make it up on commercial. This is a business park, one of those build it and they will come kind of investments. This one, the city went out, build the wide industrial streets, created all these lots, put the deep pipe in the ground, and tried to attract businesses to move in. The park was so successful that every single lot was built out, and the city wanted to build the exact same thing, so just take the same thing and actually just mirror it on land they owned right next door. So we said, great. If we could build the same thing for the same exact cost and get the same amount of value, would this be a good investment for us? At the time, it was $2.1 million of public investment. The amount of tax base created was $6.6 million. Now, pause. In this existing industrial park, 4 of the lots were a church. 2 of the lots belonged to the school district. It was their bus maintenance building. 1 of the lots was a county maintenance building. 1 of the lots was a city maintenance building. These are all very important, for this community. We need churches, we need schools. None of them pay any taxes to the city, right? There's no ongoing revenue from any of those entities. Of the remaining properties, the ones that theoretically would pay taxes, everyone was given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract them to move to this existing park. We sat down and modeled it based on how it had been developed. And what we found is that the revenue stream didn't even pay the interest on the new debt they were going to take on. In order to make this cash flow, we had to assume a number of things. The first thing we assumed is that within 12 months of this new park being built, the entire thing would be occupied by full tax-paying, non-subsidized entities. In other words, it would all build out within 12 months, no subsidies at all. And every penny of new revenue that would come into the community would go to retiring that debt. If that occurred, it would still take almost 3 decades. It would take 29 years for the city to break even. And that's 29 years where everybody else's taxes were going to need to go up to pay to plow the snow and mow the ditches and provide police protection and fire protection and every other service that was needed. And that's an insanely optimistic scenario. Like I said, we did dozens of these analyses. I used to do a presentation where I would go through them all, and at a certain point, people would just start crying, and it became unhelpful to go on with any more. I substituted some charts, and I'm going to apologize. I am an engineer. That means I'm required to show you charts. There's only 3 charts in this presentation. If you are not someone who likes charts, I'll tell you a story, and you can follow along with the story. This is a chart of cash flow. Let's say that a developer comes to our community and says, I have this piece of property I would like to build upon. I will, at my expense, build all the residential homes. I'll build all the commercial buildings. I will follow all of your rules and regulations. I'm not asking for any subsidies or handouts of any type. I will, at my expense, build all the required roads and streets and curb and sidewalk and pipes and pumps and valves and meters and lights. I'll put it all in. The only thing that I'm asking is that when I get done making this investment in your community, that you, the city, you, the public, the shareholders of this municipal corporation, you agree that you will take on the long-term responsibility to provide ongoing service and maintenance. What would we say? We say, fantastic, right? We spend nothing, you spend everything, we get all this new growth, like this is remarkable. But let's say, we've heard of this strong town stuff. We want to be prudent in how we approach things. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out the revenue that's coming from these new homes, these new businesses, and we're going to take that and we're going to set it aside. The portion that would normally get spent around the community fixing and maintaining stuff. And every year when that revenue comes in, we're going to take that portion, we're going to set it aside. We're going to allow it to grow and accumulate so that when we get out a generation from now and we have to make good on these promises that we'll go out and fix and maintain and take care of stuff, that we have a pot of money to do that. This is what that looks like from a cash flow standpoint. You can see in year one, you've got money that comes in. Everything is brand new. It hasn't cost you anything, right? You have the money, you take that portion, you set it aside. In year two, you add to what you had in year one. In year three, you add a little bit more. Year four, a little bit more, and on and on and on. And you can see a 5-year-old road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old sidewalk isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything. And so year after year after year after year, you have money coming in and you just set it aside. It starts to accumulate. And you get a couple decades out, you've got a lot of money. You've got a big pile of cash there. The problem comes when you actually have to make good on this promise that was made. In this example, 25 years later. And what we see is that the cumulative amount of money is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, you run far, far into the negative. Now, cities aren't one development, right? Cities are a collection of developments, a series of neighborhoods. So let's say that our developer comes back in a couple of years later and says, that development I did worked really well for you, it worked really well for me. I would like to do a similar size development. And every other year from this point forward, a developer walks in the door with a similar size proposal. In other words, the ideal scenario for any community, nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take this money and we sequester it aside, we save it for the day when we have to make good on all these promises. This is what that looks like. In year one, your first development comes online, it pays in the full 25 years shown here. Year three, you've got another, year five, and on and on. And you can see your community is having growth upon growth upon growth. Your cash actually starts to accelerate upwards, feeling very, very rich. And when you get to year 25, the year you have to make good on that very first investment, yeah, you got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all of this growth. The pattern of development provides what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money over the long term on every project that you do, over time, the weight of promises, the weight of liabilities starts to overcome your cash flow, and you run far, far into the negative. This is the story of American cities post-World War II. We idealize, we look at this boom at the end of World War II, and we nostalgize it as this great thing that happened. And if you look at any of the economic charts that the left wing in this country puts out and the right wing in this country puts out, they all converge on the early 1970s as being this divergent point where prosperity started to break down. What we see from a municipal standpoint is that at the end of the first generation, the first life cycle of that post-war expansion, cities started to take on massive amounts of debt. They started to overcome this insolvency problem by taking on more and more and more debt. When we got to the housing bubble in the early 2000s, that debt level went exponential. And we now see cities with massive backlogs of promises, maintenance obligations, maintenance liabilities, along with very high tax rates and very high levels of debt. This is not a viable long-term position. I want to talk to you about how we got here and the changes that happened, because I remember as a young engineer, when I would ask questions, I would say, why do we do things this way? The people who had been there a while would say, well, Chuck, that's silly. This is the way it's always been done. But the reality is, what seems normal to us, because we've all grown up in this kind of post-war pattern of development, pattern of living, style of growth, it seems very normal to us, but in the terms of human history, even human history in North America, it is a very large experiment. It's a very large kind of deviation from historical norms. This is my hometown. I come from a little city in central Minnesota called Brainerd. If you've ever heard of Brainerd, Minnesota, yes, some nods. It's a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Yes, Brainerd, Minnesota. Yes, thank you. This is what it looked like in 1871, the very first iteration of Brainerd, Minnesota. I'm going to point out something right now. If we went back to the very first iteration of Norman, Oklahoma, I don't know if you have a photo or not of it in your museum or what have you, it's going to look exactly like this. Not because, we had the same geography, not because we had the same climate, not because we had the same, but because every city in all of human history that was founded prior to this new experimental way of building started out just like this. What you are looking at, we should think of as a little bet. People got together in a place. They said, we think we can make a go of it here. They popped up like the cheapest shacks they could put up, and they kind of had a dream about what the future could be. We built thousands of these across North America. And for a variety of reasons, a lot of these places failed. What happens when a place like this fails? Yeah, it just becomes a ghost town, right? There's no act of Congress that needs to happen. The stock market doesn't crash. We don't have record unemployment, right? This is a little bet. A few people salvage what they can. They'll pull out the glass and pull out the iron, and they'll move on to the next place. We built thousands of these across North America. And for a variety of complex reasons, a lot of these places became successful. And when they would become successful, they would grow in a very simple, organic kind of way. They would grow incrementally up, they would grow incrementally out, and they would thicken up. They would become incrementally more intense. Think of a culture growing in a petri dish, right? As these places were built, as more people moved to this town, what would happen to the land value in the middle of town? The more people that moved there, the more the land value would go up, right? How long were these little pop-up shacks going to last? 10 years, 15 years, whatever. As the land value was going up and these little temporary shacks were starting to fall apart, what you have is a natural redevelopment pressure. Rising land values with structures declining means that people can buy that lot and build something more substantial. And so this is 1871. By the time you get to 1904, this is what this exact same street looks like. And as the city continued to grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense, eventually after another 4 decades, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would be converted into buildings of brick and granite. This is the incremental development pattern that we see around the world. When we study different civilizations throughout all of human history, we see this same style of development. These little bets leading to a reinforcing pattern of thickening up growth and the city becoming stronger and more resilient. We began a different approach in the 20th century and accelerated that approach at the end of World War II. And we're going to talk about why we did it, because why we did it was very logical. But I want to show you what this street looks like today. It is a wasteland of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. And from a strong town standpoint, when we look at our municipal corporation, right, we recognize that in this little stretch of street right here, there's $500,000 of public investment. We add up the roads and the streets and we add up the sidewalk, the drainage system, the pipes, the street lights, all that. You've got $500,000. Where is the wealth that we are going to tap into to sustain that investment, to make good on those promises? The wealth used to be there. It's no longer there. Why did we do this? We tend to look at things in a modern lens, right? And so when we look back at this period of time, we want to impose on it our narratives of today. I think that's a kind of a not only faulty and misleading way to think about it, I think it actually doesn't help us understand the human decisions that went into this. We look back and we say, well, these people were greedy or racist or put your modern meme on it. My grandfather lived through the Great Depression. He moved in with the neighbors and they allowed him to sleep in the barn and then they fed him. And in exchange, he worked the farm. This is in Minnesota, so that was not a luxury, right? But my grandpa said he was very, very lucky to have that. He said there were a lot of people who were a lot worse off. My grandfather was a Marine. He was the first group into Nagasaki after they dropped the bomb. So that gives you a sense of his age. He grew up during the Great Depression. He said he was very lucky, very fortunate to have what he had during the Depression. I took away from that one thing. The Depression was really, really hard. It was, if you read historical accounts, it was very disorienting. Nobody really understood at the time what caused the Great Depression. All of a sudden, we just had skyrocketing unemployment, a crashing stock market, banks seizing up, nothing worked. Nobody understood why. Even today, you can read economists that will say, here's what caused the Great Depression. And then you'll read another economist that says the exact opposite caused the Great Depression. They don't agree. Even more importantly, nobody understood how to get out of the Great Depression. If you read about the New Deal project was trying a whole bunch of different things to see what would work. What got us out of the Great Depression, or what we're told got us out of the Great Depression, was World War II, right? Stop for a second and think about that. Only an economist would look at global war as the answer to economic malaise, right? Oh, GDP is growing again. Yay. Tens of millions dead. Oh, well, GDP is going up, right? If you were a bean counter on in Washington, D.C. or on Wall Street, and you didn't care at all about humanity, about human suffering, about anything, all you cared about was the spreadsheet in front of you, World War II is a fantastic thing. If you were an actual, real, live human being, this was a horrible time to be alive. Millions of people shipped overseas to kill and to die, tens of millions dead, millions more drafted into industries of war, building things that we would literally just blow up. No productive use for society, right? Only an economist would call this prosperity. Yet, as we were getting towards the end of World War II, there was panic amongst the economists that were advising Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is a quote from Paul Samuelson, who is the preeminent U.S. economist in the 20th century. He was an advisor to the Roosevelt administration. He wrote a memo about the coming end of the war, I think in 1943. In that he wrote, were the war to end suddenly, there would be ushered in the greatest period of unemployment and industrial dislocation which any economy has ever faced. In other words, when we bring all these troops home and when we wind down all these industries, we're just going to go right back into the depths of the Depression because nothing is different about our economy today after the war is over. We have the gift of hindsight, right? Like we know what happened. What happened was not the Great Depression again, right? What happened was something completely different. We created a new version of America. A new version of America that we felt would not only keep us out of the depths of the Depression, but would allow our economy to grow and grow to the point where we could create a middle class, where we could have a broader shared prosperity, where America could be the most prosperous nation in the world. We took our capacity, our industrial capacity. We had the world's reserve currency. We literally had the world's gold here, right? We had more oil coming out of the ground than Saudi Arabia. We had all of this developable land. We took all of these assets, including a population united in common cause against an enemy, and we redirected all of that unity and capacity back to building a new version of America. And here's the thing, it worked, right? I know we can talk about nuance because this post-war boom didn't bring everyone with it. But again, I want us to be as generous as we can and try to understand the most optimistic notions of people that it will eventually right? The rising tide, in a sense. We can look at it back now and see that those were hollow promises in many ways, but I think that was the framing of the time. This idea that if we could just take and take those tools that we had put in place to keep the economy from going down in the Great Depression and instead put them towards building this new version of America, we could do amazing, amazing things. I'm going to say this because you're all friendly and you're not going to misconstrue what I'm saying. Yeah. So if you know you're a partisan person, just dial it back for a minute. Okay? The 2016 presidential election here in the US, obviously a historical election in many ways. We all have our own take on what happened in that election and the like. I want to tell you what I saw throughout that entire election season. I saw two 70-plus-year-old candidates looking back at what they considered the peak of their time on earth, explaining to us how they were going to recreate that for us again today. Whether that was a vision of Aussie inherent families and blue-collar jobs, or whether that was a vision of an expansive federal government that could do great things, expand the safety net, expand Social Security, expand Medicare, what have you. These two candidates were envisioning the same period of time, that couple of decades right at the end of World War II, when everything seemed easy and possible. I want to show you what this looks like for a city on a map, because it is astounding what we have done. And I'm going to show you a map of Fresno, California, not because I think Norman, Oklahoma is Fresno, California, but I think you're going to see your story in this map. What you see up here is the boundaries of Fresno in 1897. So this yellow thing right here, that's the extent of Fresno back at the turn of the 20th century. Watch now as it grows over time. Here is 1909, 1922. Now we're in the middle of the Great Depression. We've got that incremental development pattern growing incrementally up, incrementally out, continually thickening up. Now we're at the end of World War II. You'll note that Fresno grew during the Great Depression. The amazing thing about the traditional development pattern, about the style of development that our ancestors around the world used for thousands of years, is that it is capable of growing during bad times. It does not have the boom and the bust that we have today. Here we're at the end of World War II. Now we want to stay out of the Great Depression 2.0. We want to have our economy grow very, very quickly. We want to experience a growing middle class and rising prosperity. And so we adopt cities as an engine of growth in our economy. And here's what happens. 1958, 1970, 83, here's 95, and then 2010 is the last slide I have. My little hometown at the end of World War II is 13,500 people. Today, we are 13,500 people. We're 10 times the area. 10 times the pipe, 10 times the road, 10 times the stuff. Now, we did this study in Lafayette, Louisiana. And by we, I say Urban 3, a firm out of North Carolina that does financial analysis for cities, invited me to come and hang out with them and help them figure out this question about why Lafayette was going broke. I'm going to give you a map from Lafayette later, but I want to focus on some of the data we pulled together. At the end of World War II, Lafayette had a population of a little over 33,000. Today, it's 3.5 times that amount, a little over 120,000. But at the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person to provide the people of Lafayette drinking water. Today, it takes 50 feet of pipe per person, 10 times that amount. At the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people to provide fire protection for the people of Lafayette. Today, it's 21 times that amount. Now, we can look at those numbers and we can say, Chuck, I get it. I know and understand. It takes more stuff today. But look, we have bigger houses. We're more prosperous. We have more cars. We drive more. We have more stuff. We have a higher standard of living. And I'm going to agree with you that we have more stuff, right? But when we step back and we look at family wealth in the city of Lafayette, what we see is the same thing that we see in cities all over the country. We can grow our population very rapidly, but we grow our liabilities by even more. But when we look at things like household income has hardly budged. And since the mid-1970s, it hasn't budged at all. What we see today is that an increasing number of families actually have a negative net worth, actually owe more than what they have in wealth. Yes, they have a lot of stuff. They also have a tremendous amount of debt. This development pattern is not creating prosperity. It is creating transactions. It is creating economic flow. And remember, if you are an economist, I'm going to say this in the most crass way. I usually don't go this much, but you guys seem to be encouraging me on here a little bit. If you're an economist and you deeply, deeply care about GDP growth, but millions and millions of debt doesn't seem to faze you all that much, at least not in the books you write about the economy. World War II got us out of the Depression, right? The idea that we are growing the economy is an overall good, that we're doing it on the backs of our families and our cities and our small businesses, that they are becoming systematically poorer with every increment of this development strategy, does not seem to faze us. I want to show you what this looks like on the ground because it's very pernicious. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. If you look at these, you'll see they're the same size, same area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure investment. If we're looking at this from a municipal corporation standpoint, these 2 properties cost the same to us as a corporation to provide service and maintenance to. But the development pattern on them is very different. That block on the left, during the 1920s, as my city was growing incrementally, the next increment of out was this neighborhood here. These 3 blocks, the block on the left and the block on the right and the one in the middle, were all built in the 1920s like that stuff on the left. Think of that pop-up shack in the 1870s I showed you. This is the 1920s version of that pop-up shack. So out on the far edge of town, people built the cheapest building they were going to build, with the idea that as the neighborhood filled out, as the community continued to grow, the land would become more valuable. They'd eventually get 2nd and 3rd stories, build their wealth, build their equity, that kind of thing. Of course, that's not what happened. These were built in the 20s. Then we had the Great Depression. Then we had World War II. Now we have the city as kinetic growth machine. We skip right over these properties and we start building out on the edge. These 3 blocks have stagnated for almost a century now. That block on the right used to look just like the one on the left. We labeled it Blight, got the buildings torn down, and now we have the new Taco John's drive-through. Do you all have Taco John's? You do not have Taco John's? Oh. You can think of Taco John's as like Norwegian Mexican food. So, wildly popular where I come from. Lots of mild cheddar cheeses. We were thrilled about this, right? We got rid of a block of blight. We got a building that meets all of our building codes, all of our zoning codes. It's got commercial sprinkler systems. It's got ADA compliant bathrooms. It's got all the right amount of parking. The sign meets the sign ordinance. The bike walk advocates showed up and asked for a sidewalk. So they built a sidewalk. It ends right there, but they built that stretch. The environmental advocates showed up and they wanted native plants in the stormwater area. So they actually put native plants back in that between the alley and the drive-through. When we went through a checklist of all the things we were trying to accomplish, every box was checked. Every box was checked. Here's what nobody bothered to look at. That old blighted rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new Taco John's, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, just a different style of development, has a total value of only $600,000. There's 78% more wealth in that old rundown junkie block. That old rundown junkie block has more employees, has more local owners, has more stuff going on than that new block. And understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional development pattern, the way we built cities for thousands of years around the world. You're looking at that pattern in its infancy after a century of decline and neglect, and it still outperforms the stuff we build brand new today by a wide, wide margin. And everybody in this room knows what the future of that taco place is, right? We've all been around long enough. 20 years from now, it will be a used car lot. A decade later, it will be boarded up. We'll be trying to get some type of tax subsidy to get it torn down and redeveloped, right? We've all been around long enough to see this cycle. This is a compelling case study, but it is not a cherry-picked one. This is a pattern we see over and over and over again. I mentioned Urban 3 earlier. Urban 3 has done the most innovative mapping that I've ever seen of North America finance. What they have done is they've gone out and they've said, what is the most productive parts of a city? They have modeled hundreds and hundreds of places. If you think of a farmer going out and spreading seed around a field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we say that's the most productive part of the field. So you get the most bushels per acre. So where's the most productive part of the city? Where do we get the most wealth per acre? Where do we get the most value creation per acre? This is Buffalo, New York. And I start with Buffalo, New York, again, not because I think you are Buffalo, but because Buffalo is emblematic of decline. Every year since the end of World War II, Buffalo has lost population. It's been a steady downward cycle. I happen to really have a soft spot for Buffalo. It is a great place full of great people. But if you go there today, Buffalo is struggling, and it outwardly looks like it's struggling. Yet if we step back and say, where's the wealth in Buffalo? Can you point to the pre-Great Depression development pattern? Their core downtown, the surrounding neighborhoods. Despite the decline, despite the neglect, these places are massive repositories of value, and they absolutely dwarf everything we built subsequent. This is a pattern we see in city after city after city. It doesn't matter if it is a northern city or a southern city. It doesn't matter if it's a big, small, mid-sized town. It doesn't matter if it's on water or not, if it's in the coast or the plains. When we see the pre-Great Depression development pattern, what we see are areas that are very productive financially. Where we see post-war development patterns, we see the exact opposite. We see them diminishing in financial productivity over time. And this doesn't matter if the places are occupied by the wealthiest people in the community or the poorest people in the community. The pattern remains the same across all places that we've studied in North America. This little town, when I first went here, this is Crosby, Minnesota, right next to where I live. I was the city planner here for a little while, I was a city engineer for a little while. I remember when I first went here, they said, Chuck, we've got great stuff happening out here. We've got great stuff happening out here, but these core neighborhoods are really horrible. We've got to get some of this stuff torn down. And then we showed where their wealth is in all those bad neighborhoods, in the neighborhoods that are occupied by the poorest people in town. This is a map of Lafayette, Louisiana. And this one looks like the other ones I've shown you because the pattern is very, very similar. But this is not a map of financial productivity, wealth per acre. This is a map, you can think of it as a profit and loss map. We spent about a year in Lafayette, going there multiple times, interviewing city staff, pulling records, looking at things, trying to help them understand why they were broke. Why is this fiscally conservative city in a fiscally conservative state with a small bureaucracy, aggressive growth approach, dedication to public investment, prudent kind of ethic. Why is this place bankrupt? When we went there originally, they had a $50 million backlog of road maintenance, and their annual road maintenance budget was something like $2.5 million. So they had decades backlog. Why? And so what we did is we looked at every ongoing expense the city had, and we mapped them all up. Here's where your road expenses are. Here's where your sidewalk is. Here's where your drainage system, your water system, your transit service, all this. We then looked at every source of revenue the city had. Here's where your property tax is coming from, your sales tax is coming from, your utility fees and all that. We had dozens of maps, and when we finished, we mashed all those maps together into this profit and loss map. Every place you see a blue parcel, you're looking at a property that pays more every year in taxes and fees to the city than it requires in ongoing service and maintenance. And the higher that line goes, the more the disparity is. Every place where you see red is the exact opposite, right? These are places that pay more in taxes or pay less in taxes and fees than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. Lafayette, Louisiana, again, is a city I really like, I enjoy. No one is going to go to downtown Lafayette and say this place is doing great, right? I'll give you some pictures here in a sec, but let me show you what's going on. This is the core downtown of Lafayette. This is a crescent of blue. These are probably the oldest neighborhoods in the community. Here's a snapshot of what these places look like. Nobody goes to downtown Lafayette and puts it on a postcard, right? I really like them. They're doing good work. They're working at it. But no one would say this is really prosperous. The neighborhoods on the bottom clearly do not look prosperous, right? They look the exact opposite. They are occupied by some of the poorest people in the community. Let me just clarify too, the map that we put together here, the assumption was that the city was going to go out and actually do the things they promised to do. So they would maintain the roads, maintain the ditches, do those things. The fact that they're not doing it, which they're clearly not, you can see in that lower picture, just would make that blue line higher than it is. Okay. The red stuff, all that stuff out here, this is what you would expect, right? It's the big box stores, the strip malls, the gas stations, the drive-through franchise restaurants, the windy cul-de-sac streets. There's two subsidies depicted in this map. And there's subsidies that are essentially ubiquitous across North America. There's a few exceptions in places that have been highly gentrified, but these are, two subsidies we see pretty much everywhere else we look. Subsidy number one, poor neighborhoods are subsidizing affluent neighborhoods. And even bigger, future generations are subsidizing the present generation. In Lafayette, Louisiana, the median household pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. They'll pay other taxes to the parish and the school district and what have you, but $1,500 to the city. In order for the city to make good on every promise they've made that's represented in this map, maintain every road, every ditch, every pipe, median family taxes, we need to go to $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. One out of every $5 that a family in Lafayette makes, we need to get sent back to the city. That's not going to happen. That is never, ever going to happen. And so what we see in Lafayette is that their $50 million road maintenance backlog of 5 years ago is now $125 million. And they are forced every year to make a decision. This is a road we take care of. This is a road we let fall apart. This is a pipe we repair. This is a pipe we let go of. This is a neighborhood we keep. This is a neighborhood we walk away from. This sounds a lot like a city we're all kind of 2 steps removed aware of, right? This sounds a lot like Detroit, doesn't it? I get a chance to speak with a lot of people, and I found that everyone has a story about Detroit. Everyone has an explanation of what has happened in Detroit. And if you're a very left-wing person, you have a narrative about Detroit. If you're a right-wing person, you have a narrative about Detroit. They have very little overlap. The only overlapping observation is that we are not Detroit. That's the only thing that everybody agrees on, right? My city is not Detroit. Detroit is different in this fundamental way. Let me give you my story of Detroit. In the early 1900s, as Detroit was on its way to becoming the Motor City, they were the very first city in North America to experiment with what would become the North American pattern of development. They were the very first ones to have commuters live on the outside of town, drive their vehicles in. They were the first ones to put highways through the middle of neighborhoods to make that happen, to tear down buildings, to put in parking lots, to redo and redevelop their city along this new pattern and framework. And when we hit the Great Depression and World War II, and cities all over were declaring bankruptcy and having all kinds of difficulties, Detroit and a series of cities kind of in their constellation comparatively did very well. And so by the time we got to the end of World War II, every mayor, city council member, alderman, Chamber of Commerce president, Rotary Club, they all knew what we needed to do to make their city successful. They needed to copy the development pattern pioneered by our most successful city, that being Detroit. And that's what we did. To me, Detroit is not hard to explain. If you take a wealthy city and you spread that wealth out over a huge area, driving up the costs and driving down the tax base, you get the insolvency of Detroit. Like all bankruptcies, it happens slowly and then very quickly. I don't feel like Detroit is some weird, crazy place. It's not some anomaly different than any other place. It's just early. They're just a generation ahead of everybody else. I wrote that in my book, and my mom called me at the end of chapter 3, and she said, "Chucky, this is a really sad book." I said, "Stick with it, Mom. It gets better." She would tell you that it does get better. There is hope, but the hope comes from what we bring to the table, what we are willing to consider and willing to do. I have a saying from Silicon Valley I want to share with you by way of getting to the end of this conversation tonight. Tonight is our kickoff. We're going to be back here this summer. We're going to be back here again this fall. In between now and then, we're going to be engaging with a leadership team in the community. We're going to be engaging with an action team in the community. We've got a lot of conversation going on here. But to wrap this up tonight, I want to pivot us to a little slice of what I think is possible if we can change our mindset about this project that we're undertaking together. So out of Silicon Valley comes this insight. Innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb. While innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. If I asked people in this room, do you prefer dumb or smart? We're all going to say dumb, right? No, we're all going to say smart, right? We all prefer smart. But recognize that as affluent people, we have a really strong response to chaos. We do not tolerate messiness. We have a high expectation for orderliness directly because of our affluence. We will tolerate a ridiculous amount of dumb in order to not experience a tiny amount of chaos. And if you doubt me, think of your own behavior. What was the last time when you sat at a traffic signal at 1 a.m, right? You can look every direction. You see that there's no reason you can't go, but you don't go, do you? Because you are dedicated to order. You are willing to be really dumb if you go visit poorer places. One of the first things that go is they stopping for traffic signals. I spent 6 weeks in southern Italy, very poor part of Italy. It was astounding. Nobody stopped for traffic signals. They will stop, but stop as in I'm going to slow down and look. Nobody stops. Why? Because at some point, you start to prefer smart and you embrace a little bit of chaos. when you don't have the affluence that we have. Affluence is a great thing. We can do lots of stuff with wealth, but wealth actually constrains us. People ask me all the time, if I want to see what a great North American city looks like today, where should I go? And I say, go to Detroit, go to Memphis, go to Shreveport. The most innovative things going on in America today are not in Silicon Valley. They're in our most struggling cities. And this innovation is going on because they are facing that decline. They're facing the end of this pattern of development, and they're being forced to do things differently. I'm not saying it's something we should aspire to, but we should aspire to learn from where they're at today and their level of innovation. Let me give you 3 quick examples of chaotic but smart. This is something in my community we call a tiny house. My ancestors would have called this a house. For some reason, we have put the adjective tiny on the front of this and, freaked out about it. We now, if you want to build a tiny house, you have to meet all the provisions in the ordinance of a house, right? Plus, you have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house ordinance. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors. You have to go genuflect in front of the planning board. You have all these things you have to do to build what in all of human history would just commonly be thought of as a starter home, right? We used to build small starter homes. When people saved up a little bit of money, they would put an addition on the back. When they had a kid, they'd put on a second story. The neighbor would come over and help. They'd go help their neighbor. Civilizations around the world build wealth this way. We have said, no, you cannot do this. To get into a house now, you have to be able to get a 30-year mortgage product. You have to have a work history. You have to have a certain credit score. You've got a thing. You can get predatory lending, but then if the market goes bad, you're going to get driven out of your home. There's all these things that we've done. This, to us, seems like chaos. Why? Why aren't we building tons of these everywhere? That's what our ancestors did. We should look at this for what it is. This is not a permanent condition. It's a starter home. This is a shot of Muskegon, Michigan. Muskegon, Michigan, deindustrialized city, struggling to fill businesses in their core downtown. Got to the point where they recognized that they were going to go broke trying to subsidize businesses to move in. Realized that they had lots of entrepreneurs in the community, but the bar of entry to get into the downtown was just too high. It's not that the buildings were in great condition. It was actually the exact opposite. To go in and start a business in a downtown building, you were going to have to do all this stuff to bring it up to code. You were going to have to put in commercial sprinkler systems, fix the ADA bathroom, do things that we should want done, right? I'm not suggesting these are bad things, but the bar of entry was too high for people starting out. And so what Muskegon did is they went and bought a bunch of storage sheds. They painted them up funky colors. They put them in a vacant lot that they owned a couple blocks from the downtown, and they rent them out dirt cheap to startup entrepreneurs. 70, 80 bucks a month. No long-term lease, no long-term commitment. And understand who is in these buildings, right? A startup entrepreneur is different than an investor. An investor is someone with money who's looking to deploy that money in a place where they can get a return. An entrepreneur is a crazy person with an idea who doesn't recognize that they can fail, right? What we want is we want to incubate them. We want to nurture them. We want lots of places for them to go. So these storage sheds become that place. If you go there, the storage sheds are always full, and they're full of life. The stuff just flows out of them. There's all kinds of stuff going on year-round. Muskegon, Michigan, north, cold. Stuff going on all the time. Guess where else stuff is going on all the time? Their core downtown. Because what happened is that people were able to get started here, figure out how to make their business work. Try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, try, succeed, and then graduate, in a sense, to the core downtown. Chaotic. Not a little messy, right? Let me give you this third one. One of the takeaways that you should have from this presentation is that we have built more stuff. Our municipal corporation has built more stuff than we will be able to maintain. That is a universal truth across North America. We have built more pipes, more roads, more stuff than we have the capacity to maintain. If you have built more than you can maintain, there's kind of two obvious responses to that. One, did someone say raise taxes? That's not the most obvious one to me. Stop building stuff, thank you. Right? Like there's a saying that, we have sometimes internally at Strong Towns, if your roof is leaking, you don't add a swimming pool on the back, right? Stop building stuff. The second part is we need to make better use of what we already have. We figure out strategies to make better use of what we already have. Our post-war development pattern is designed to do one thing, right? It's designed to keep us out of the Great Depression by growing very quickly. And we all recognize and understand that if we extend that frontage road one more mile, if we put one more subdivision in, if we extend pipe out another mile, we will get the next iteration of growth. That is easy. That takes no brains. That is simple to do. But it also costs our municipal corporation. We lose money in those transactions. What is harder to do, because it takes thought, it takes brains, it takes savvy, it's messy, it's not easy, it takes interpersonal relationships, it takes working things out, is to go back to the things we built and make better use of it. The way we start doing that is to respond to how people use the city. We have built a city, we have built a municipal corporation, we have laid out our geography in a way that works for some people and doesn't work for a whole bunch of people. And we need to actually shift our public investment strategy to focus on the latter, because the latter is our lowest cost, highest returning types of investments. At Strong Towns, we created a 4-step approach to making the lowest risk, highest returning public investments that we can make. And I'm gonna go through it right now. It's very, very simple. Step number 1, humbly observe where people in the community struggle. I'm gonna stress humility here. The idea is to go out free of what you think you're gonna find, free of what you think should be, free of what you think is happening, and observe. Try to understand, how do people use this municipality? Where are they having a difficult time? Try to identify that with as much lack of preconceived sense that you can. Step number 2 then, ask the question, what is the next smallest thing that we can do right now to address that struggle? I'm gonna emphasize here, smallest thing, not what is the thing that we always wanted to do, what's the thing in our 5-year capital improvements plan, what is the thing we'll get to in 5 years, where can we get the federal grant from or the state program? No, what is the thing we can do this very second with the materials we have on hand? With cones and duct tape and paint and straw bales, what can we go out and do? Step number 3 then, do that thing. Do that thing right now. Don't bring in a consultant, don't send it to a committee, don't study it to death. It's a small little thing. Go out and do it. And step number 4, repeat that process. Repeat it over and over and over. I see a lot of nodding heads in this room. I see a lot of people taking pictures of the screen. I'll send you my slides. You can have them for free. I've written all about this 4-step approach. You can type in Strong Towns 4-step approach. You'll get all kinds of articles about this. There's a lot of people nodding and you're like, yes, 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 I'm with you. But I'm gonna tell you, as soon as your city staff goes out and starts doing this stuff, someone's gonna show up at City Hall and say, wait a sec. You're putting cones out here? This is crazy. Didn't we study this? Shouldn't we have a committee? Shouldn't we da-da-da? Why? Because we're affluent. We prefer order to chaos. And we are willing to tolerate a lot of dumb in order to have order. If we think about how the private sector corporations innovate, There are famous stories of corporations launching big products that fail miserably. New Coke, that was the one when I was a kid. You young people don't remember New Coke. Ask your parents. Totally insane, right? You got the most successful product in the world and you throw it away and launch a brand new one and everybody hates it. It's really dumb. But those things are dumb because we recognize them. What does Google do when they're launching a new product? They beta test it. We'll get 1,000 people to try it out. What do you think? We'll get 10,000 people to try it out. What do you think? We'll expand that a little bit. Then we'll launch it wide. They try it out small. They test it out. This is what every smart corporation does. Our corporation can be likewise smart, but we have to get beyond this idea that everything has to be orderly. It's a really, really difficult thing. I want to leave you with this. There is a world out there of really good projects for our municipal corporation. There's a world out there of really good projects that are profitable for the private sector. There is a world out there where those two things overlap. And that should be the world we're trying to work in. That should be the world we're trying to live in. We need the private sector to be strong. We need them to make investments in our community. We need them to make a profit. We need them to be successful. We want that. But we don't want that at the expense of our collective corporation, our municipal corporation, the work we are doing collectively together. If we focus on that circle on the left, and we ask the public sector to focus on the circle on the right, there's a lot of times that we can meet in the middle. And if we don't meet in the middle, we should never leave the circle on the left. Because if we want our municipal corporation to endure, if we want it to be here a decade from now, 2 decades from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and I don't mean just exist as a place on the map, but I mean be here as a place that thrives and does successful things, a place that does good in the world, we have to live in that left circle for our municipal corporation. And we have to demand that our leaders do the same. Thank you so much, everybody. We have about 10 minutes or so. Thank you. So if you have, let me put it this way, Minnesotan, if you have to go, if you have to go, you won't offend me. We've been here a long time. You all have been very patient and very diligent. If you have to go, no offense, man. Thank you for coming. Yeah. If you gotta go, you gotta go. Like, I get it. It's you need, if you have a question, we'll stay for like another 10 minutes and do that. Then everybody can go. And if you have a more intimate question, you wanna come up, I will stay for a while yet after that and we can talk. The microphone here, for the people that are watching from home, wow, I just saw me up there. That's been not okay. The people watching from home would appreciate hearing your question. If they're gonna hear your question, you have to get the microphone like this close. Like really, really, really close. So please, does anybody want to avail back here? And then up here. Is that good? And I asked him not to hand the mic to people because I don't know you. You all seem very nice. But as a professional thing, if you hand the mic to people, meetings start to go crazy. So.
Yeah, I just had a question on how the project kind of adapts to Norman, specifically because, municipalities in Oklahoma are singularly funded by sales tax.
Yeah.
And a lot of the discussion has been about property tax. So how's that mediate?
But it hasn't been about property tax, it's been about wealth creation. So let's delve into that for a second, because I've written a lot of articles on sales tax. First of all, I want to tell you that Lafayette, Louisiana, the biggest source of revenue there is sales tax. So when I show you that map, they're collecting sales tax, and that's what it looks like. And when we model sales tax communities, they look a lot like property tax communities in terms of like the distribution. What you get though is you get concentrations of cash flow coming from certain places. And it's a little bit deceiving. I started with Walmart tonight and I said, if Walmart goes away, do you all not get Funyuns and toilet paper anymore? And you said, oh no, we would get those things. Where would you get them? You would get them from some other mechanism. And so recognize that with sales tax, there's a couple of obvious things. The first one is that the revenue is actually tied to people for the most part, not to the store, the entity, right? So you live in the city, you shop at Walmart. Is that really sales tax revenue that Walmart has created or your existence creates? It's sales tax your existence creates. Now, there's nuances of that, right? If we can be the Walmart capital of Oklahoma, or we can have all the car lots, right? We can shortchange every community around us and collect all their sales taxes. Wouldn't that be awesome? There's that aspect of it. So that is the rivalrous nature of sales tax. And that will work for the winner for a while, but the winner always eventually becomes the loser. There's one other aspect of sales tax, though, that I think is really, really important. To the extent that we have this unbalanced, unhealthy relationship with commercial growth. In other words, if we can get the Walmart, if we can get the thing that the other people don't get, there's kind of like a race to the bottom to try to get that. If we can acquire that, we do better than our neighbor, right? There's also this systematic devaluing of our neighbors. If I am acting completely rationally as a municipal corporation, in other words, we no longer have shareholders, we just have me acting on your behalf. I'm going to be an algorithm who's just going to try to maximize revenue for this municipal corporation. The thing that I want is I want all of you to live in the neighboring city and shop in my city, right? And so what happens is you have I start to devalue the people around me. I find that to be really, really pernicious. And so the maps and the case studies and the things we've shown you hold true in a sales tax system as much as a property tax system. Your core downtown is going to generate, on a per acre basis, greater sales tax revenue than the biggest Walmart you have. Walmart will take up 40 acres and will generate a lot of revenue, but a tiny little postage stamp lot will generate proportionally way, way more at much lower cost. That being said, I do think long-term that having a system dependent on sales tax is very distorted and undermines your overall wealth. Who is the greatest citizen in a city dominated by sales tax? It is a person who, well, let's go down that path. It is the wealthy person who moves to town, spends all of their wealth locally, goes into deep debt, and then leaves. That is the greatest person. And here's the thing. Anytime you have a government system that is misaligned with a private system, in other words, they're rivalrous, what is good for the government is not good for individuals, what is good for individuals is not good for government, you get systems that don't work right, they fail. What happened during COVID? You got screwed, right? Because sales taxes plummet. Sales taxes rose. Well, congratulations. You're stealing from everybody around? Yeah, well, screw them. You had a question then? Oh, it was the same question. So please, back here.
Hello.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you. I guess my question would be, you mentioned how, back then it took proportionally less items in order to create a functioning community, but now in our current society, it takes a lot more pipes, a lot more sewage drains, a lot more roads to just function.
Right.
Now, my question to you is, how much would an impact of a walkable community be, transitioning towards, a human scale, being comparatively to the current car model that we have here in the United States?
Yeah. Say that again. The question again.
Yes. Would building at a human scale
help?
Help.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the 6 principles of a strong town, That is, I think, the fourth, is that we need to build systems at a human scale. Let's be clear what we mean by that. Strong Towns is adamantly not anti-automobile. I arrived here in a car today. I drove to the airport in Minnesota by car. We have cars. We're going to always have cars, or at least in the indefinite future. We don't think cars are bad things. But if every trip has to be an automobile trip, every trip, you get yourself financially into a situation where the amount you're expending on every trip is so great compared to the revenue your municipal corporation is getting that it doesn't make any sense. It financially doesn't work. And so, yes, part of coming back from this insolvency we've created is going to have to include a strategy of building neighborhoods where people have options to get daily things they need, biking, walking, and using other forms of transportation besides an automobile. I like to point out, and I think this is an easy thing for us to get our minds around, at lower interest rates, so today it might be a little bit less than this, but I know a few years ago, there was a study, some car place said that it costs on average $8,500 a year per automobile for a family. You add up the price of the vehicle, insurance, gas, all this stuff. If you can have a living arrangement where your middle-class families, and let's not make this a poverty thing, let's just say middle-class families. It works even more for the poor, but let's just focus middle class. Your middle-class families with kids starting to get off in life, right? You're starting to get there. You want to save now. You want to be prudent. You got these beautiful babies. You want to be very responsible. If you can get in a situation where a family like that can have one car instead of two, that is transformational in terms of what they can save, what they can invest. You can actually afford about $120,000 more of a house. So when we talk about housing and affordability, it absolutely changes that equation of what is affordable and what can you do. And so all of a sudden, a wealth building strategy for us as a community, a strategy that invests in us, is one that focuses on walkable neighborhoods, bikeable neighborhoods, neighborhood businesses that serve people's needs, the whole kind of suite of things. And I think that's how we should really look at it. Automobiles are great. They have liberated us in many ways. They've connected us over a great distance. But they've also made it so my neighbor, when they go 2 blocks to the park, literally gets in their car and drives 2 blocks to the park. Like that, there's something wrong with us when we do that. And there's something wrong with us when we make that not only the default option, but the only safe option that people can do, right? If it's not safe to walk those 2 blocks, people won't. We can, I'm gonna say this, and I don't, I'm an engineer. I don't want to sound like a hippie, right? But like seriously, I think I don't have a problem with automobile corporations. I don't have a problem with insurance companies. I don't have a problem with oil companies. But all those things, well, maybe not the oil as much, but the rest of them are outside of your community. When you buy a car, you're sending thousands of dollars to somewhere else. When you buy insurance, you're sending thousands of dollars somewhere else. When you buy gasoline, some of that might be oil you produce here locally, but most of it is a refinement process of transportation out of the community. When someone can walk and bike, that money that is getting shipped out can be freed up for other things. And that is, when we talk about doing more with less, what we see in the Detroits and the Shreveports and the Memphises and Buffaloes and those kind of places is that they are, in a sense, forced to do that. But by doing that, it's transformational. How about one more? Anybody, please, back here? And then my colleague Edward and I have, do you have anything you want? You're good. Sorry, friend. Go ahead, please. No, you're good.
That 4-step approach, humbly observing where people struggle in the community, asking the question, what's the smallest thing you can do? Go do the thing, and then repeat that process. Where does participatory budgeting fit in that? Would you say that fits right in there, or?
Wow. So we're going to end with that. So let me say one thing about public engagement broadly, which I think participatory budgeting fits in with this. I think public engagement broadly often comes from a really well-intentioned place in society. And I think a lot of people who advocate for public engagement and broad public dialogue and all this are coming at it for righteous reasons. I wrote an article that is one of our most widely read articles ever. Public engagement is worthless, I think is what it was called. There was a follow-up that a friend of mine wrote, public engagement is worse than worthless. I'm not going to say that I've never seen a participatory budgeting process that is worth doing. I have seen some. I think it can be very good. I think it's good for having dialogue and discussion in the community. But understand where our modern public engagement processes come from. In the 1950s and 60s, as we were embarking on this kinetic growth machine experiment, what did we do? We just went out and ran over neighborhoods. We just went out, I mean, literally, there's a book called Big Roads, fantastic book. It's all about like building the highways in the country. And as you read these stories, you get to a point where the engineers were actually going to use atomic weapons, not atomic detonations, atomic weapons, to level parts of the Rocky Mountains to run a highway from Denver to like Los Angeles or whatever, Las Vegas or whatever it was. And you recognize that there was absolutely no limit on the hubris of our professional class. Public engagement came about really in reaction to that. And so you had the protests of the Jane Jacobs of the world, but then you had following on to that, the environmental regulations of the 1970s, clean air, clean water, the environmental review process and all this. I was just gonna say something that would get me in a lot of trouble. I'll say it. Okay, thanks for the encouragement. There's a certain, there's a certain mindset. Okay, I'm gonna say, I'm Gen X, I'm gonna turn 50 this year. Please respect the idea that every generation is frustrated by the generation ahead of them and befuddled by the generation after them, right? That's a shared universe. So my generation that I'm frustrated with is the boomers, right? For boomers who lived through the kinetic growth period after World War II and, 2016 election, we're gonna restore, make America great, bring back the post-war boom era, right? Their answer to this was process. Because affluent people respond to stress with layers of process. You can see that locally here too at times, right? Okay, we respond to stress by having more process. The environmental review process, all the processes that came out of that period of introspection, like, wow, we are doing really bad things. Do you know what we need to do is a lot more public engagement, came out of that. And I think it has not served us well. I think ultimately, if you just look at the environmental review process, the environmental review process says you can do your project, you just got to go through a whole bunch more red tape. Now, it has provided opportunities for litigation, opportunities for other things that have swayed projects and moved things. I won't say it's completely worthless, but very few projects have ever been stopped because of these engagement processes. So now we're a long ways from participatory budgeting. I see participatory budgeting as like the attempt out of all of that to say, let's take this well-intentioned public engagement process and expand it to this part of government that's not working, budgeting. Because budgeting does not reflect our values in any way. If you look at, when you go through a participatory budgeting process and you ask people, how should our local government be spending their money? And they do the little dials and they say, and then you actually get what they're doing, it is so far out of whack. Fire protection, police, public safety. People will generally 20% of the budget. They don't realize that it's 50%, 60%. It is very out of whack. So it reveals that in a way that's really good. The 4-step process, I think takes that whole public engagement process and shuns it aside. And it really goes back to something that Steve Jobs said. Steve Jobs said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a better Walkman. Instead, I looked at how do they use this thing? And I tried to respond to how they used their Walkman. They wanted to put it in their pocket. It was too big. They wanted to carry it around places. It wasn't functional for that. They wanted more. They didn't want to have to pull out a cassette tape every time they were going to, listen to a new song. They wanted lots of songs on here. And so we have that great innovation of, digital music and the iPod and all that, because we asked a question in a different way. We didn't ask, how do we take our existing process and tweak it? We said, how are people using this thing, and where are they struggling to use it, and how do we respond to that? If we could, in practice, this is one of the most radical things you can do. I give it to you, and I've noted you are all nodding and like, yeah, that's what we want. Go to City Hall tomorrow and ask people to do that, and they will look at you dumbfounded, like no one, this is crazy. And if you do go out and do it, this City Hall will be flooded with people at the next meeting saying, why are you wasting money on paint over here and cones over here and stuff? We got roads to fix, we got things to build, what are you doing? So culturally, we have a lot of work to do to get to the point where I think something very logical, like humbly observing and trying to respond to that in incremental ways, actually has traction. I'm not going to tell you participatory budgeting is bad. I spend almost no time on it because I don't think it's where we need to be spending the most of our energy. I feel like there's something I should say here at the end, too. Strongtowns.org/Norman is where you can go to sign up for email about this project. We've got an email list. There's a lot of people on there. We're going to be sending out just information and updates. If you are interested in the things we've discussed here tonight, our engagement here is going to last this entire year of sharing ideas and information. If you're interested in this stuff, go to strongtowns.org. We publish 2 or 3 articles every day. We have 3 different podcast streams, so if you're an audio person, there's a lot of stuff there to listen to. We do videos regularly, so there's a lot there. If you are on social media, whatever platform you're on, I'm almost guaranteeing that we are there or there's a conversation about Strong Towns that is there. If you want to participate in this process, the thing that we're asking people to do is just inform yourself. Like that's the first thing. Like, go read up, go learn, go engage. You're going to have questions. You're going to have things that don't sound right to you. You're going to have things that you get all excited about. If you really, really want to be part of this process, the thing that we're asking you to do is talk to your neighbors about it. Like, what we're embarking on here is a year-long process to try to inject new ideas into the conversation here and shift kind of the center of dialogue. And so, we get asked, well, what are your deliverables? Are you writing a report? No. We're just sharing ideas. And we're trying to do it in as many ways as we can. You can help by taking whatever you think is positive out of this conversation tonight, or whatever you find otherwhere in our conversation, and sharing it with others. Everything that we do is Creative Commons licensed, which means it is free for you to use, free for you to copy, free for you to share. We even go so far as to say, if I've written something and you like it, you can copy, paste it, put your name on it, and pretend you wrote it. That is perfectly okay with us. So, thank you for being here. Let's keep in touch. We'll be back sometime this summer, and I hope to see you all and bring someone with you. We'll do this even more. Thank you.